Ever since I started flying, I had to work to keep from dying, especially since I came to Vietnam. Seems on every combat sortie.
Okay, my name's John Pollard. P as in Paul, O-L-L-A-R-D. Hardly anybody knows me by that name. Most people know me by Jack. I enlisted in the Air Force while I was still in high school, Northampton area, junior, senior high school, Northampton, Pennsylvania, senior year. And I graduated high school in June, was in the Air Force in August. Went to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training. From there, I went on to Chanute Air Force Base, Rantoul, Illinois for tech school, which was for jet engine mechanic. Graduated from Chanute, and that was in December, late December, early January, and actually I ended up in Thailand February the 14th. Happy Valentine's Day.
What year was that?
That would have been 1970. And I was there at Nakhon, Phanom from February of 70 to February of 71.
Did they tell you where you were headed when you got your orders, or was that a mystery? Had you ever heard of Nakhon Phanom?
Oh, I had never heard of Nakhon Phanom. I had an APO number. That was all I was given on my orders. And didn't know where I was going until I got to Travis Air Force Base in California for the flight to Thailand. We flew out on Braniff International, which was hired by the government to transport people, military personnel to Vietnam and also into Thailand. So we flew into Bangkok. I stayed overnight in Bangkok, and the next morning what they called the traffic office told me that there was a flight going north and I should be on it. And it was on a C-7 Caribou. The nickname is Old Shaky, and it lived up to that name. I went out to the aircraft, threw my duffel bag in the cargo compartment, and I asked the flight engineer, where do I sit? He looked at me real strange and said, sit. He said, just jump on something that's chained down and hang on. So we flew up north to Nakhon Phanom. And I got off the plane at Nakhon Phanom, and there was a gentleman there, had a Jeep, and he said, I'm supposed to take anybody that's staying to the CVP, or the, not CVPO, but the headquarters office. And I thought, well, I'm the only guy on the plane, so I guess I'm staying. So we loaded up in the Jeep, drove over, I signed into the 56 Combat Support Group. And they told me I would be in the 56 Field Maintenance Squadron at the jet engine shop, and I should report there tomorrow morning. Okay. So he took me to where they said I was going to be living, the hooch, and they dropped me off, and the guy drove away. So I opened the door and walked in, and it didn't look like any place to sleep. There was no beds, nothing like that. But there was a sergeant there, a guy with 3 stripes. They called him a buck sergeant. He introduced himself. He said, my name's Darrell. I said, my name's Jack. He said, okay. I said, well, he said, I'm not sure what we're supposed to be doing here, but he said, they told me to come here. Okay, so we're standing around, and there was a wall phone on the wall. The phone rang, and Darrell, being the ranking guy, he went over and answered it. And I heard him say, no. And then he said, I ain't got one. And he hung up. And he said to me, Jack, let's go to the movies. Okay. So we had it up and went to the movies. Saw the movie, stopped at the Airmen's Club for a beer, came back. And when we got back there were 4 other airmen in there. They were soaked with sweat. All grimy and dirty, but now we had beds. There was a big laundry cart with linen and pillows. And Darrell said, what happened? And the one airman said, we were sitting in the day room doing nothing, and the first sergeant came in and said, you 4 gentlemen will meet with a staff sergeant in 5 minutes out front. You will go and build beds and be set up to, fill the billet. And Darrell looked at him and he says, you're kidding. He said, was the first sergeant upset? Oh, he said, he was PO'd. He said, he talked to some wise guy here that said, he told him no, he wasn't staying to make beds or build beds. And he said, when he asked him his name, he said he ain't got one, and he hung up the phone. And Darrell said, really? And Darrell looked at me like, okay, don't say nothing. No problem, your secret's safe with me. So that was day one. That was the first day at NKP. So I signed in, got my toolbox, and the tech sergeant, he handed me, the guy that had the paperwork, I signed for every tool in the toolbox, and he gave me 2 locks. I said, what's the 2 locks for? He said, Airman, locks are to keep honest people honest. If a thief wants your stuff, he's going to get it one way or another. It's like, okay. So I had my toolbox, and I was all set to work on jet engines.
So now you said that you worked on jet engines. You went to school, or they trained you on fighters.
They trained
correct?
me on an F-100 fighter aircraft, and I never worked on another fighter aircraft my other 4 years in the service.
So when you got in, they put you in taking care of, can we go down through the aircraft that you did take care of?
Okay, when I got to Thailand, we were taking care of CH-3s and HH-53s, big helicopters. I have worked on OV-10 Broncos, C-123K models, and C-119 gunships with the illuminator on them, the big light in the back. And my primary mission, when I got to be on the flight line, that came within like the first month of being on the base. There was a space opened up for flight line maintenance, and I volunteered to do it. And they put me on night shift, worked 6 at night till 6 in the morning. And that's where a lot of the work got done, because the planes were down, they were accessible, and you could go out and do whatever you needed to do with your own time. Take your time doing the job.
Most people don't understand. We did not fly combat missions much in the evening or in the late hours. So they gave you a little time when they came back to work on those.
Correct.
Were you involved with any of the repairs on any of the search and rescue or anything like that? When things got heavy, from what I understand, when something happened, it happened really hard, really fast, and everybody was on their toes.
Well, what we had, they called max effort days, which mostly involved SARs, which are search and recovery missions for down pilots or troops in ground troops that are in combat or in contact with an overwhelming force, and these helicopters would go in and scoop them up and hopefully get them out of there.
Can you give me an idea what that day would be like?
Well, I worked 6 at night till 6 in the morning. If a SAR came in before 6 o'clock, you were almost guaranteed you were going to be there until you were either relieved, or the pilot was picked up, or was confirmed captured, or in worst case scenario killed.
Did you ever meet any of the pilots? Did you?
I never met any of the pilots, although I did witness some of the returns where the champagne was flying, and the guy got all kind of attaboys and hosed down and things like that with a fire hose and stuff like that.
Do you remember any of those, what those missions were when they would come back? Anyone that sticks out in your mind?
Well, there was, our squadron bar was called the Hole in the Wall. Okay. And we had a flashing red light and an alarm bell. And if you came in the bar with your hat on, the bartender or the bar girl would turn on the alarm and the flashing red light. And that meant you had to buy a round of drinks for the people in the bar. Well, there was a captain came in and kept his hat on, and it rang and rang, I'll bet you, for 15 minutes. And he was just so happy to be able to pay for that round of drinks for all the people in the bar, because he was back safe in our territory, and not in hostile territory, running around through the jungle trying to evade the enemy.
How did that help your morale when you were working all those hours to actually be involved in the celebration? What was that like for you?
It was a good feeling, because everybody says, well, you really weren't in combat. No, but I contributed a heck of a lot to the outcome of a lot of good combat stuff. And well, you were a jet engine mechanic. Yeah, but without my skills, the plane didn't go. So I felt my contribution to the whole war effort was pretty darn important.
I have to show you a post from a friend of mine. He's actually the gentleman that got me involved in all this, Roger Youngblood. Did you ever run across him? He was an A1 pilot.
No.
But he started out on C-123s when he first got there, his first tour, but he went into A1s. And last night he was serving at Nakhon, Phanom, and he was giving you guys the highest praise, saying, he trusted his crew chief with his life every day, and he understood that when that plane took off, somebody had taken good care of it so that he could go do the job he could.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've heard that more than once from pilots. They would talk about the guys on the ground and everything you would do, especially if a SAR was going on.
Yep.
Making sure.
Whatever it took to get that bird ready to fly. We had what they called red ball work orders, which meant the plane was ready to fly, but for some reason the pilot said, there's something wrong here, needs to be fixed. And when you're an 18-year-old kid and someone puts that much confidence in your ability to fix that aircraft and make it airworthy, that gives you a pretty good feeling that, this guy's a college graduate, I'm a high school graduate with the training to fix a multi-million-dollar plane, and he's saying, if you fix it, I can fly it. And it's like, it's a great team effort.
That's fantastic. Do you have any memories that stand out, either happy, excited, or a tragedy that might have happened? I know there was several crashes that...
We were in the launch truck, and we had a radio that we could talk to maintenance control and the control tower. And we got this message that it's all units, this net, we have an IFE in progress, which is an in-flight emergency. An aircraft has low oil pressure, high engine vibration, inbound with hung ordnance. And they told the pilot to go out, try and get the ordnance off the plane. Well, in the process, we witnessed the plane. It was an F-105 fighter. It crashed, and we had about a quarter-mile debris field. It took out one of our guard towers and actually killed the Thai guard that was in underneath the guard tower in like a bunker. And for many, many, many years, that stuck in my mind, that the pilot was killed in the crash. And on one of the websites that I visit frequently, I found out the guy had gotten out of the aircraft, had bailed out, but nobody told us that. And all these years, this has been in my head. And somebody said, well, do you ever think about it? I said, usually about 4 or 5 nights a month it comes up. And the other thing was, I lost a very good friend, Sergeant William Ripley. Rip was a little older than I was. He was a flight engineer on CH-3, and they were lost in the country of Thailand, or I should say the Kingdom of Thailand, they were actually shot down. They were flying between Nakhon Phanom and another base, and the plane went down. There was a lot of speculation. They were on a special mission. They were transporting a special person, those kind of things. Come to find out, it was just, they were just shot down. And the crash recovery team that went there saw that there was evidence of a shell hitting the gearbox of the helicopter, which kind of took all the controls away and everything, and the plane crashed and burned. And all of the pilot, or all of the people on the plane were killed except one guy, and he was severely burned. And my buddy Rip was killed in that crash. And he's on the wall, and I've visited the wall 4 times, and I always go check his line number and name.
That's beautiful. I'm sure he would appreciate that.
No.
Now, where did you go after Vietnam? You got out.
I came back to Langley Field in Virginia, and worked on C-130s there. And they had 3 squadrons of them. We traveled with a lot of them. Every time they rotated, we sent engine people with them. And I got to go to Rhine-Main, Germany, Mildenhall, England. Never got to Turkey. There was always somebody more eager to go to Turkey than I was, because I had heard stories about Turkey, and it just wasn't the kind of place you wanted to be, I guess. But I had TDYs to a lot of different places. I was to Alaska, the Panama Canal Zone, the Azores, Spain. All of those came from other TDYs to other bases.
Can you explain to the viewers what TDY stands for? Not many people, if they're not in the military, they're not going to understand.
TDY is a temporary duty assignment. It's an acronym that the military uses. At least the Air Force uses it. And it's basically being sent from your home base to another base to either work with special aircraft, or if there's a group moving from one base to another, they'll send guys TDY to get the planes in and parked and prepped up for the next missions that are coming up.
Fantastic. Now, when you got out of the military, how was your experience when you came home?
When I came home, it was different. It was 4 years of not being around stuff that you notice things. I came home. My mom had moved. We lived outside of Allentown, and my mom had sold the house and moved to Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. And when I came home, I flew from California into the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Airport, and there was nobody there to meet me. So in spite of my letting them know that I was coming home, and I took a cab into Wilkes-Barre and got the bus down to Bloomsburg, and I got off at the McGee Hotel, where the bus station was located at, and there was nobody there to meet me. So I asked the guy at the counter, I said, "Where is East Street?" And he said, "Well, you go out the door here and turn right, walk up the street till you see the police station, turn right again, and that's East Street." Okay, so I knew the house number. So I grabbed my bag and headed for the house. And I got there, I rang the door. The door was locked. I rang the doorbell. And about 3 days later, I found out from my mother that it didn't work. So I started knocking on the door, and my mom opened the door, and she goes, "Oh, it's you." So I thought, well, welcome home.
Oh my goodness. On a funny side note.
Yeah. It was a little humorous thing there for that. But my job-wise,
I've spent 4 years in Vietnam and in the military.
Yep.
And when I come home,
it's you.
I might feel just a little abandoned here.
Yeah. It's you. But I got out of the Air Force. I wanted to stay in the worst kind of way, and I couldn't convince my wife of a year and a half that it was, the thing to do. I had been offered a variable reenlistment bonus at that time, $10,000, because there was a big demand for the skills that we had. And she's like, I'm like a single parent. I said, you're not like a single parent. Your mom and dad live in the same house. You know, it's like, okay. So I decided, okay, I'll get out. So the first job I had was construction. A family friend offered me a job in the construction business. Absolutely hated it. Wasn't skilled with pounding nails and things like that. It just was just nothing that really interested me. So another family friend offered me a job in the travel business. And I was a manager of a travel agency in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, and made about $125 a week. Well, that's not really a livable income, but I did have some good times there. We traveled what they call familiarization trips. I got to go to Hawaii, and I went on my first cruise with Holland America Lines out of New York City. So it was a good gig there. When I left there, I went to work for Susquehanna Trailways out of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I was a tour and charter guy, and did a lot of work with that. But I still wanted to be in my law enforcement, which when I got out of the Air Force, or as I was getting out of the Air Force, I took a project that was called Operation Police Manpower. And it was kind of setting you up on what your career would be as in a law enforcement agency. So I did that, and I worked at the county prison for a while, about 12 months or so. And all of a sudden I get a call from the Capitol Police down in Harrisburg. So I went down there for the interview, not really sure whether I'd take the job or not. And I went in, I met this captain in charge of the police department, and he looked over my resume and he said, United States Air Force, huh? I said, yes, sir. He said, Allentown, you were recruited in Allentown? I said, yes, I was. He said, you remember the name of your recruiter? I said, yes, I do. He was a tech sergeant. His name was Wally Gerd. He says, who do you think Wally worked for? Well, I said, I don't know, probably some E8 or E9. He said, Pollard, he worked for me. If you want the job, it's yours. And I thought, wow. So, but in discussion, it was roughly a 2-hour ride down to Harrisburg and a 2-hour ride home and an 8-hour shift. You were looking at a lot of time, again, away from your family, and also travel time. So I declined that job. About a week later, Kutztown University calls. We'd like you to come in for an interview. We're starting our own police department, and you could be on the ground floor. So, okay. So I went for the interview. And again, it was very difficult getting back and forth to Kutztown from where we lived. So I declined that job. And within like 3 days later, I get a call, Bloomsburg. At that time, it was Bloomsburg State Teachers College. They called. We have an opening. Are you interested? Come up for an interview. So I got that job, and that was in 1978, February of 78, and took that job. And in 93, they went into this state system where the 14 state colleges all became universities. And I worked there till June of 2008. And I enjoyed my career there. It was an enjoyable experience. We worked on every crime other than a homicide, and there's one of those that still hangs in my head as it could have been a homicide. We're never sure.
Now, how do you think the military prepared you for life later on when you went into the law enforcement?
Well, it naturally, most law enforcement agencies are a paramilitary organization. You follow orders, and that's what we did in the Air Force. We learn protocols and different ways of doing things than what the civilian population would do. And I thought I fit in very well to that lifestyle. And my wife continually jokes about, did you go into cop mode with them? Because I'm a fairly easygoing guy, but when I have to put the cop mode on, I can do that too.
That's pretty good. Now, where would she ask you if you did that? Did you raise children?
Yes, we did. I've got a son that he's the superintendent of the Wyoming Area School District, Pennsylvania, and a daughter that works in the Human Resource Department of Talent Energy.
Very good. I can see with, I have a son and daughter. I always felt the son was easier to raise. The daughter, as soon as she was born, I was on the defensive slash offensive.
Yep.
You knew you had to watch, so yeah. There was...
My wife said if our daughter would have been the first child, there probably would have not been a second. They both turned out great. There was times that you're like, oh my gosh, my son tells a story now. This is what 30 years after graduating college. I had friends on the town police department, and one night my son and a buddy are walking up a street. They're going to a party house, and it's dark. They're walking, and this voice comes out of nowhere. Pollard, if I were you, I'd keep right on walking. And the kid that was with him said, "What the hell is that?" And he said, "I don't know. It must be somebody my dad knows. We better not go to the house." Well, within a half hour, the place got raided. Everybody got arrested for underage drinking and stuff. And it was a good friend of the family. He was a sergeant on the town police department, and he knew my kids as well as he knew his own kids.
That's fantastic. Do you have any closing remarks? Would you recommend the military or law enforcement as a career for people coming up? Both
are honorable professions. You make a career out of the military, 20 years you retire, and you still got a lot of time to devote to another career. I worked with a guy that spent 22 years in the Air Force and came and spent another 15 in the police department there at the university. And he would have lasted longer, but he succumbed to a cancer. So it was a great combination of working with him and knowing him and his family. That both girls went through the military. His son retired from the military, so it shows that a military family is a good thing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Jack. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about while we're here?
It's just the fact that today's military is not the same military as it was in '69 to '73. And when there's an organization that I belong to, we go around primarily for Veterans Day. We give talks at the schools, and I always tell the kids, my experience during the Vietnam War was a whole lot different than Army or Marine Corps guys. I never had to sleep on cardboard boxes. I never had to sleep in basically a hole in the ground with bomb boxes for walls. Always had a shower available, 3 meals a day, sometimes 4, and clean sheets and things like that. And everybody says, well, we get ourselves busted a lot by the Army and the Marine Corps. And they say, well, when they put an Air Force base in, the first thing they put in is the golf course and the swimming pool. And then if there's more room available, they'll put in a flight line and aircraft will come there. But we always say, when things were really at their worst and you were on the radio, who'd you call? And we always came. I'm sorry, I get a little
No.
emotional.
That is beautiful. No. You're absolutely right. We were talking that I'd spent some time interviewing SOG,
Mm-hmm.
some Green Berets,
Yep.
and they can't say enough about if they were somewhere way off behind the lines.
Yep.
The first call was Prairie Fire.
Yep.
Come get me.
Come get me.
Get me out of here.
Yep.
And they always did.
Yep.
And especially, you know, the A1 was an offensive weapon.
I used to love to watch those things taxi, that big compound 3350, boom, 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 and the wings loaded with armament, and you'd watch them taxi out and take off, and you think, oh, somebody's going to get a real hammer on their head here pretty quick.
But then when the helicopters would come in, they're thin-skinned and they had a few weapons on board.
Yeah.
Those guys were incredibly brave.
Those guys had big, big cojones.
Yeah.
No two ways about it.
Well, Jack, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time with me.
Appreciate the opportunity.